Welcome to Biota Live. I'm Tom Barbley, and this is being recorded live on TalkShoe, December 18th, 2009. Biota Live is a continuation of the Biota podcasts. For more information on the Biota podcasts, go to biota.org/podcast. Well, this is the last podcast recording for 2009. I know we've been away for a couple of weeks. We've had a couple of weeks off for this kind of period, and the original plan was to record 2 weeks early and then have a podcast currently as well. However, Liz Swan could only make this evening, and I thought, why not take a bit of a break and then record a bumper podcast for the end of the year with Liz Swan this evening. So Biota Live will return in a slightly different format next year, or at least the early part of next year. I am going to be recording Biota Live on the Saturday. The feedback that we got from the last Saturday recording, in fact, the Saturday recordings that we've done, has been particularly strong, not saying anything about the average or the usual crowd that turn out on a Friday night. It's always wonderful to have folks in the chat room such as Ryan Flanagan and Dick Gordon, but certainly both Dick and Ryan have participated in the Saturday recordings as well. So I'm yet to decide whether I'll be recording in the morning or the afternoon on Saturday, or potentially the early evening as well. And I'd like your feedback. If you listen to Biota Live and you'd like to participate either in the call and the chat, please let me know what the ideal time on Saturday would be, potentially Sunday as the dateline switches over. I record in Nevada, which is currently Pacific Standard Time. So the west coast of the US, so please work that out with regards to where you are currently. But there is potential to cover the entire globe in either doing morning or afternoon recordings of Biota Live on a Saturday. So for folks listening in who'd like to participate, who haven't participated yet, this is your chance. Please let me know when you'd like me to record Biota Live, tom@novalape.com, and I'll make a decision pretty early in the new year, set up the first call, and then Biota Live will continue, as it has for the past 2 years now. This is also kind of the 2-year anniversary, or the first episode next year will be the 2-year anniversary, and I think the Biota Live format is wonderful. Certainly I won't be changing anything in terms of how we hold Biota Live, but the actual time for the recording will change for the early part of next year at least. My wife is doing a course over that period of time, and it's just easier to record on the Saturday. So get in contact, tom@novalape.com, and let me know when you'd like me to record Biota Live to fit in with your particular schedule. In addition to this, I've had some correspondence with regards to the Grey Thumb meetings, and I haven't really publicised Grey Thumb much in the past 6 months. Truth be told, as I mentioned in the interview with John Klein, there's been a slowdown in Grey Thumbs, both in the Bay Area, Boston, London, the Netherlands, these kind of areas. And really, I think this is the ideal time for the Grey Thumb communities to probably start looking at what they'd like to do and honing their specific skill set. Oliver, who appeared not in the last Biota Live but the Biota Live previously, recently moved to Boston, and I put him in contact with Adam Eremenko and John Klein and Brian Peltonen as the kind of core founding members of Grey Thumb in Boston. And they have agreed apparently to get together for a drink and maybe a meal and have a good chat about artificial life. And I think really we can return to this kind of grassroots grey thumb element in the current times. I certainly know in the Bay Area there are a number of folk who would like to do something relatively simple. Hello, caller.
Hello, it's Dick Gordon calling.
So, Dick, coming into the new year, we have had some discussion associated with Biota 5 leading up to this point. But in terms of the changing economy, in terms of a possible changing perspective of artificial life, what's your current thinking with regards to Biota 5 going on in 2011?
Well, basically, we need some volunteers to form a committee.
And reaching out to the community, when we've talked about this, both when you were here in Las Vegas and also via email, I've always stressed that we need to have people in a number of different areas of the artificial life community, and perhaps even the communities that kind of vein into the artificial life community, like the game development community, perhaps some of the science versus religion folk, these kind of people. I mean, in terms of the committee that you want to form, how many different areas would you like to take people from? Are you still thinking about a kind of diverse group for Biota 5, or would you like to really hone into what you started in Divine Action Natural Selection?
Well, I think what we need is a couple of working volunteers to, people who actually want to put some energy into it, and then we can make those decisions. I'm not fussy. I mean, you've talked about narrowing the scope in some ways. You've also talked about making sure that there are ways that people could participate electronically so they didn't have to travel. But I don't have any hard and fast ideas about how to do this.
And do you plan on going to the Artificial Life 12 conference?
No, that's too expensive for me to get to. That's in Denmark, I believe, or? I think so. Yeah.
And we have another caller on the line. Let me just bring in the other caller. Hello, New York.
Hi, Tom. It's Liz.
Hi, Liz. Good to have you on the call. We also have Dick Gordon on the line, and I expect we may get Bruce Tamer in the near future. Liz, this is your first time appearing on Biota Live. Would you like to introduce yourself to the Biota Live community?
Sure. My name is Liz Swan, and I have my PhD in philosophy from the University of South Carolina. I just received my PhD last year. And now, although, yes, my phone number is New York, I actually live in Colorado, and I'm teaching philosophy for the University of Colorado in Denver this semester and then in Boulder next semester. And I've been interested in artificial life now for, I guess, the past 5 or 6 years, and have managed to get a couple of publications in artificial life, which, as you know, is kind of rare for a philosopher. And so I'm just joining the group and interested to hear what's going on with the group these days.
But I think what's interesting about artificial life, I mean, if you look at Margaret A. Burden, if you look at Marc Badeau, if you look at the philosophers that Margaret A. Burden brought together in her original philosophy of artificial life, you get the sense that artificial life is philosophically sticky, that it has a number of interesting philosophical questions. What are the particular philosophical questions that interest you about artificial life?
I guess the main question that got me interested in artificial life in the first place, when I started reading it, I came from a philosophy of mind, cognitive science background, and was actually doing research in artificial intelligence and came across that book that you mentioned by Margaret Bowden, which is a fantastic collection of essays on the topic. And the more I read about the methodology, how artificial life experiments actually work, the more it struck me that they work just like thought experiments that philosophers are much more familiar with and much more comfortable with. And I remember a few years ago kind of floating that idea by some of my philosophical colleagues, and everyone thought that it just didn't work and it wasn't right and it was a poor comparison. But I stuck with it, and eventually did get this paper published on just that idea. But I see what A-lifers are doing as a different way of doing thought experimenting. So for philosophers, this tool of thought experimenting is a really important tool, because in philosophy we talk about all sorts of things that we can't empirically prove. They're just beyond, the constraints of time and space, or practical constraints, experiments that couldn't possibly be done in the real world. So we're used to relying on thought experiments, and I see a lot of what artificial lifers are doing, especially in soft A life and scientific computing, as being just like thought experimentation. So that was kind of my first in. And then more recently, as I'm more and more interested in philosophy of biology and looking at how philosophy understands the concepts of biology and tries to find truth in concepts in biology, I am interested in looking at artificial life as an alternative way of looking at biological theories. So I guess those are the two main interests of mine in artificial life.
So I think you've beautifully touched on both my interests initially, because the background of Noble Ape is exactly what you're describing with regards to this idea of philosophical thought experiments, and also Dick Gordon's interests with regards to the kind of broader philosophy of biology somewhere coming through artificial life. Dick, can you talk about that with regards to your own experience in the artificial life community that may benefit Liz's thinking as well?
Well, I guess I'd like to question Liz on. I just read her article, the one published this year, Synthesizing Insight: Artificial Life as Thought Experimentation in Biology, and she mentions but doesn't draw any judgments about what I think is called the strong A-life hypothesis, and that is that artificial life is alive. And I'd like to delve into that a bit if she'd like to talk about it.
Sure. Yeah, that's interesting that you should bring that up, because since the publication of that paper, working on another one, I have been in touch with a philosopher of science in Germany, and he brought up that exact question/objection, which is, and he even sort of took it further, saying it sounds like, sometimes it sounds like you're saying A-life creatures are really living, and sometimes it sounds like you're saying they're not. So, what gives? What's the bottom line? And my reply to him, and thus to you, is the same, which is, I, as a philosopher, I don't want to really take a stand on that question, because what I'm seeing in my research of A-lifers is that some of them, Thomas Ray, for instance, does believe that these are real instances of living things. These really are living things. There's no reason to argue that they're not. And then a lot of A-lifers are saying, well, that's not so important whether they're alive or not. They're sort of, emulating or simulating the same biological processes that we're interested in, and that's all that matters. And, I mean, to really disclose my own beliefs here, I definitely have been called a biological chauvinist before, so I do tend to believe that there is something unique about biological material, especially when you get to complex organisms with brains. But I don't really have a solid proof philosophical argument for that. That's more philosophical intuition. And the way I leave it in that paper that you mentioned, the Synthesizing Insight paper, is I take the more modest approach that if artificial life programs can simulate these processes to an extent that biologists themselves are finding them useful and interesting and insightful, that's good enough for me.
Well, it seems to me the question, you have to look at if we stick with soft A life, then we're dealing with computer simulation and therefore with computer code. And it seems to me the fundamental question is the relationship between such code and what we might call the real world. The ideas on that range all over the place, but up to the point where some people regard the whole universe as a computer simulation. So, what do you see as the relationship between code and the real world?
Yeah, I don't know if that comparison is so helpful. At least in my mind, it's not, to think of the whole world as a computer simulation. I'm not sure what that even really means, because...
do you want me to answer that?
Yeah,
I can answer that. I think I would say computer in brackets simulation, but if you look at things like the financial system, if you look at things like the legal system, and whilst components of those are computerized, if you look at the space that humans exist in, it is very heavily, if not computerized, at least simulated by both the classical and contemporary definition of simulation as we interact in the environment. But what interests me with regards to this whole definition of alive and manipulation and human manipulation is that almost all of the real world that we exist in has been completely manipulated by humanity. And the notion that simulation exists as a kind of manipulation of an environment is very much what most of us experience in the real world. So what interests me is this idea that simulation, that what may be talked about in a slightly depreciated fashion, this whole notion that all we are doing is tinkering with computers. Well, if you look at, for example, Tom Ray's work, if you look at a number of people in the contemporary artificial life community, the amount of time and the amount of energy that not only they put in, but a group the world over in terms of a very rich and interesting user base, creates a degree of credibility to at least the passive claim that artificial life simulation exists to a level that, for example, bacteria in a petri dish does, at least from visual observation. So I think these kind of claims, what interests me with regards to your approach, Liz, is the potential for people such as yourself to directly interact with the artificial life community. And it's interesting that you mentioned Tom Ray specifically, because Tom was on a recent Biota Live, and he's talking about how he now doesn't feel particularly part of the artificial life community, but what's interesting in the work that he described himself currently doing is it's very much this idea of intelligent agents in a simulation, almost cognitive science experiments in a simulated environment, which really links what you were talking about your initial interest in artificial life with the kind of contemporary, or a certain strain of the contemporary artificial life community, which I think is very strong and very philosophically interesting, more than just a kind of philosophy of biology, and more in the kind of cognitive science, cognitive philosophy space. But anyway, Dick, sorry, I took up your point.
Well, let me quote from Liz's paper here. She talks about a life as having a lurking presumption of the entire field, namely that life may be more abstract than we think, and therefore the actual manifestation of life, whether biological or theoretical, is less important. I guess I'm trying to nail you down. What do you mean by more abstract?
Oh, okay. And that sentence that you just read is not a claim that I'm advocating. It's just a claim that I'm trying to clarify in the paper. And really that's coming from Christopher Langton's famous, comparison that I have in the paper too, where he says what we're really trying to get at, and I'm paraphrasing here, with artificial life is we're trying to understand life as it could be, not life as it is. So life as it is, that's the job of biologists to figure out and categorize. So life as it could be. And I guess the way I'm understanding his idea there is that, life could be a group of particular processes or a particular kind of organization, something that could be abstracted away from biological media and could be instantiated in artificial media too. So
I understand.
Yeah, go ahead.
I understand the conclusion, but let me substitute a word in there for life. We could assume that all physics may be more abstract than we think. A number of us are involved in an online course in embryo physics, and here the assumption is that we can try to unravel ontogenesis by using physics. And if we can, quote, reduce life to physics, then in what sense is it more abstract than we think?
Abstract, and maybe it's the usage of the word abstract here that's problematic. And I'm not using it in a strict philosophical sense to mean beyond space and time, like Platonic forms or Platonic entities, but abstract as in, for instance, a computer program that you can abstract out of the hardware, abstract it out of your laptop and put it on somebody else's laptop. So I'm using it more in the sense of, maybe that's not the best word for it, but something that can be instantiated in different media. So what if life is a collection of particular, let's say, 5 processes, and these processes can be instantiated, as Tom Ray apparently believes, in artificial media or in biological media or maybe in other types of media, undiscovered, as of yet undiscovered life forms elsewhere in the universe. That's what I mean by abstract. Does that make it any clearer?
Yeah, a bit. Tom, can you? Since I'm coming in on Skype, I can't see the list of people who are logged in. Is William Buckley logged in?
I'm not sure. Let me just go check. Sorry, I'm in a different room. I'm not seeing William Buckley logged in currently, unfortunately, because I know he'd come in with a different view. But I mean, following what's being said, some of my favourite conversations with you previously, Dick, have related to actually the large gaps in biology, and certainly my background with regards to physics also indicates the large gaps in physics too. I mean, it's almost like there is fundamentally a kind of multi-level, multi-scale problem with regards to abstracting life. And I mean, certainly then you move into the social sciences as well, and what artificial life can be used to describe some of the social sciences. But I think, Liz, as we have you on Biota Live, this gives a wonderful opportunity for the Biota Live listening audience, artificial life developers, people who have developed a wide variety of simulations, to contact you with regards to this question specifically. And I think it's also your interest to get a broader kind of contemporary surveying of the community in order to give more feedback to your general philosophical questions. You mentioned Margaret A. Bowden's work in particular. If you were going to do a kind of contemporary surveying similar to Margaret A. Bowden, where would you look in particular?
Where, in what particular topics in artificial life, do you mean?
Yes.
Or recently I've been interested in trying, and this is related, maybe not directly related, but I'm interested in putting together a collection of essays that link origins of mind research with origins of life research. And I think that some of the credit for this idea can go to the team of researchers I discussed in that paper, the Biota team, who are, composed of computer scientists and biologists who are looking at the origin of complex cognitive features. Given Darwinian principles, how can we even get complex cognitive features out of sort of simple, quote unquote, simple living systems and what's already there in living systems? So that's that group of thought experiments from the Biota team maybe started this genesis of thinking in this direction, where I'd like to look at collecting essays in origins of life. So this would be like astrobiology, origins of life, people, and origins of mind. So not so much philosophy of mind, because then we're kind of in a whole different realm of thinking about mind. But what I'm interested in as a philosopher is looking at the biological origins of mind, of cognition. So that's what I would like to do if I were to update that kind of approach. And that would certainly include essays on artificial life, because artificial life, in the Biota team is a perfect example, can help to, give insight to this link, not just, I think, biological concepts and biological laws and things like that, but if we want a naturalistic understanding of the human mind, which I do as a philosopher, then we need to understand the biological origins of mind too. So I would be, in this hypothetical collection of essays, I would be open to including, experiments from artificial life researchers that are looking at exactly that tie, that link.
And certainly, I mean, in terms of previous Biota Live participants, when you talk about the origin of mind, I always go back to Roy Plotnick. Roy Plotnick is a paleobiologist. I think he's doing a stint in North Carolina, but he's normally associated with, I want to say, University of Illinois, Chicago. but his background is with regards to artificial life simulation of the kind of pre-Cambrian period as floating organisms started to work out not even intelligence, kind of sub-intelligence from moving between feeding grounds. And I think these kind of points where intelligence and the mind kind of starts from and moving through this. I mean, there are so many artificial life developers that one can list here. The Framstex team, there are elements of Breve, obviously, Larry Yeager with Polyworld. There are elements, obviously, in Jeffrey Ventrella. A number of previous participants in Biota Live and members of the Biota Live community have touched on these aspects. And obviously, Avita is part of a long narrative which kind of starts, in some regard, with Core War, Tom Ray's work, William R. Buckley, who Dick is calling onto the call, but I don't think who has actually arrived currently, is also part of that community as well. So, I mean, there have been a number of participants that probably have a number of different philosophical perspectives associated with these three issues. The reason that I wanted to have this conversation with you this evening, Liz, was with regards to the value problem, which is the work group, the special interest work group that Mark Biota and I formed probably a couple of months ago now. And it's very interesting. This is very much on the kind of applied end of artificial life, but certainly I think in terms of the long-term benefit and collaborative interest of artificial life as it moves forward within academia, within industry, and potentially also the somewhat vibrant, somewhat communicative hobbyist community. The idea of the value problem has been stated in previous Biota Lives, but what's your own particular perspective of the value problem as it associates with artificial life?
Yeah, I guess I would say right off the bat that I don't have any solutions to propose, at least at this time. But as I understand it, the value problem, from what I've been reading on the Wikipedia work group and some of the literature, half of the value problem is that artificial life creations or inventions are kind of leaking out into the larger technological world, and they're not being given due I guess value of where they came from. So that's that problem. But on the academic side, I guess the problem is that artificial life is still considered such an outlier, very fringe. People who are interested in it are very interested in it, like myself. And then the majority of, and this was, of course, the fundamental message in the philosophy paper that I wrote about artificial life, is that the majority of people who I think would be interested in artificial life, philosophers of biology and philosophers of science and mind, don't really know it exists, or they think it's just some kind of computing, and computers have nothing to do with philosophy, so they or they don't get the link. Maybe people who work kind of on the fringe of cognitive science and artificial intelligence in their philosophy of mind classrooms are a little bit more open to it, a little bit more friendly to it. But I think the challenge in academia is just maybe garnering some sort of recognition for it, or some sort of respect for it. Because I know in my own personal experience when I was in graduate school and writing these papers and going to the Artificial Life conference in England a few years ago, the warning was sort of, you as a philosopher, you can't make a career in this. Don't think that you're going to get a job in this or a career in this, because it's very sort of fringe oriented. And I understand why that's the case. I mean, it's not traditional philosophy, and you have to really make a strong case for why philosophers should pay attention to this stuff. But I think it's one of these things that, and this is not really a happy solution, but it's one of these things where, time will tell. It takes time. This philosopher of science who I mentioned a few minutes ago in Germany, he and I got in touch over a completely different paper that I'm writing in biosemiotics. But when I started looking at his work and he started looking at mine, we realized, we've both written papers on artificial life, and isn't that exciting, because we're two philosophers of science, and that's really our, main sort of career path, but we've both written papers on this. And so now we've been communicating back and forth and sharing papers and sharing, contacts and whatnot. So I think that it's happening slowly but surely. It's a very, and I think that's why I like this idea that you've put together of the work group, because there are all of us kind of scattered all over, and we might not know that even though we're philosophers, we're working in artificial life, we're each in our own little bubbles. So having some kind of communication board like this where we can get in touch and communicate is part of the solution. Yeah, I mean, I guess those are really my only thoughts on it, because I don't have any solutions to propose beyond that right now.
Certainly. And I think Mark Biota provides an interesting example of a philosopher, someone who's central in the artificial life community, and also someone who has bridged the gap in some regard into industry. And it's interesting thinking of artificial life in terms of kind of an applied philosophy context that can also be very useful in industry from what Mark has been able to do with protocell. And I think my perspective with regards to the value problem is it goes down two possible routes. The first is that it is something which is fundamentally both a philosophical and an engineering problem at a kind of meta level, that there are a number of stakeholders, and you have described one of the groups of stakeholders quite explicitly with regards to the philosophical community, but also really what was interesting with regards to getting the course list together was the number of different disciplines, and this is something that I've found also surveying US courses that kind of vein into artificial life, or at least have particular artificial life components, is that you would think it may exist in perhaps biology, may exist perhaps in computer science, but what you actually find is a number of different areas have either artificial life specific courses or will teach aspects of artificial life. And certainly, I mean, this mirrors Dick's experience with regards to his book, Divine Action, Natural Selection. Certainly, as I read Divine Action, Natural Selection, it struck me that this touched on a wide variety of areas. And I think there's potential for a similar kind of book on artificial life that could have an impact both for the philosophical community, aspects of the biological community, obviously the computational community. I think there's the ability for artificial life to actually exist as a kind of smearing vein over a number of separate intellectual disciplines has actually, as you've stated, kind of worked against artificial life up until now. But we are now in very pragmatic times, both with regards to circumstances in industry and also academia. And I think what's interesting, particularly with regards to the hobbyist community, is they're almost like the kind of, dark age monks, or, in terms of maintaining aspects of this and then percolating it back out into the academic community. You mentioned Artificial Life 11 as being a real meeting of the minds, and certainly the thing that interested me, I didn't actually attend Artificial Life 11, but the thing that interested me was Jamie Matthews. We had a kind of reporter on the ground who was doing his master's at the time, and he described a situation where probably about 2/3 of the folk that were there were actually students. And I think that's what really interests me with regards to the potential of the artificial life community to impact on a variety of students that are currently moving not only into academia but also into industry. And I think this is another interesting point. So returning to this idea of engineering the value problem, the second track that has occurred to me has always been with regards to, do we have, just within the potential of the group that we've assembled either in Biota or the International Society of Artificial Life, or even the people that we've brought in with the work group, in this assembled group, do we have all the right aspects to actually do what we need to move artificial life forward? And certainly my initial thinking in terms of engineering the value problem, identifying the initial stakeholders, some of these are historical figures, as you identified with people like Tom Ray, contemporary figures, the Avida folk, a wide variety of the folk that participate in Biota Life. But are we missing certain components to move the value problem forward, or does it actually exist in the community as we have it? And I think this is an open question. Dick, you've been surveying the artificial life community for at least a decade and a half now. What is your own view with regards to how the community has evolved, and particularly in perspective of the value problem?
Well, I think your premise there is not correct. I have had confrontations with the artificial life community, but I wouldn't say I've surveyed it. I'm really. Let's put it this way. I see that there seems to be some sort of general division between the academic artificial life community and the non-academic, and my familiarity, to be honest, is mostly with the non-academic. I've been rebuffed by the academic, and I actually tried to publish a paper in Artificial Life, which was a mild critique of a paper in that journal, and they expressed no interest in it, so I put it in an Italian theoretical biology journal. So, I'm not sure they're prepared for dialogue.
Well, they probably gave it to Dawkins to review, so he's still on the review committee.
I don't know. It wasn't rejected that way. It seemed to be rejected that they didn't want to upset the people who wrote the article.
Fair enough. I mean, the important point with regards to the hobbyist community is that a lot of the folks in the hobbyist community, I think of Jeffrey Ventrella and John Klein in particular, are ex-academics in some real life. And what interests me with regards to the value problem, and particularly this idea of the being representative stakeholders, is that a number of the stakeholders are actually ex-academics, and what they have learned from moving from academia into industry probably needs to be used to the benefit of the broader artificial life community in some regard in solving the value problem. And ironically, I mean, we have people like Larry Yeager as well, who've moved from industry for a majority of their life back into academia. So I think we have an interesting...
I think Liz's point about trying to make a case to get this stuff acceptable is sort of germane. In a way, one shouldn't have to make the case to make it acceptable. One's peers are usually behind oneself, and trying to bring them up is not exactly the kind of diapering I'd like to do.
Certainly. I agree entirely. I guess the question is whether we need, and this is a perennial Biota Life topic as well, whether we need a kind of collection similar to Margaret A. Bowden's and certainly a number of the books that inspired the contemporary, at least hobbyist, if not academic, artificial life community, or whether we can do it through, firstly, as Liz noted, this idea of going back and getting aspects of the artificial life community that are used externally recognized. I mean, your view with regards to Bookstick is pretty diverse. Do you think the artificial life community is in need of some solid collections at this stage?
Well, I think it's in need. We've identified one of the central problems of artificial life, and that is it has not succeeded in imitating the, how shall I say, the apparent unending ability of real evolution to create greater complexity, one on top of the other, but also to exploit phenomena in the world which can be quite unexpected. So in a sense, I think artificial life is at a very primitive stage right now. I mean, if you take the Biota experiment, for example, it seems that they had one single goal. I haven't read the original paper, so I'm going to have to get into them. But from Liz's description, they had one single goal, which is this most complex function, EQU. Now, in real life, in the evolution of real life, there is no single goal, and once one goal is achieved by organisms, you then find other goals keep coming up and get achieved. Now, I'm not sure. That's probably putting it the wrong way, but the accomplishment of greater complexity keeps going on. And I don't see, most artificial life simulations act more like optimization programs. Once an optimum is achieved, they don't create a goal of getting to another optimum in another space.
Let's use two counterexamples to that, Dick, because these kind of statements are often recited like truisms, and I always try to let's use Larry Yeager's Polyworld as an example. Now, obviously, there are computational constraints, and Larry is moving through those. So there is some evolution of code based purely on computational constraints. But the kind of stuff that comes out of artificial life as intelligent agent in a simulation, oftentimes, in my own experience with Noble Ape, mass extinction, various aspects of kind of novel hierarchical groups, I mean, these kind of things come out of Noble Ape, and also Larry is experiencing these things with Polyworld. The kind of constraints that you encounter with these kind of simulations are distinctly different than Golly, for example, or to a certain extent Avida, maybe less so with something like Framsticks. So there are artificial life simulations that aren't, that reach greater boundaries and greater novelty, but the constraints that you find, which Tom Ray found fundamentally with Tierra early on, relate to processing. The beauty of contemporary processing is, as I said in your book, that we are now constrained by our own mathematical and fundamentally philosophical concepts about how we construct artificial life. And I think the dialogue associated with that is in its infancy, but is slowly starting up, perhaps the potential of simulation science. But I think there are artificial life simulations which aren't classically constrained in the ways that things like Avida and Tierra were. It's just a matter of actually exploring these simulations and perhaps even doing primary research and finding and documenting the novelty individually. I mean, this is the problem fundamentally that Bruce Damer will encounter eventually with the Evo grid, is that these kind of simulations are so vast that you either need intelligent search algorithms to actually go through and find the interesting parts and then focus on them, or you need, as I've experienced with Noble Ape and Larry has experienced with Polyworld, a diversity of users the world over who email you with regards to these eccentricities. I think of a medical doctor in the Boston area who has been running Noble Ape pretty solidly for the past 6 years and describes in elaborate detail how the Noble Apes that in his particular simulations have created societies around weather movements, and also how he's tracked various genetic mutations. And I think the beauty of a lot of these more open artificial life simulations, the same is true with Larry Yeager's Polyworld, is that the complexity that comes out of them actually requires the human observers to start documenting and writing and talking about these things in order to make more of this part of the kind of ongoing dialogue, and particularly in academia. I mean, Larry Yeager has produced a series of papers, and thankfully now he has a relatively vibrant and youthful community that are also documenting these things back into academia. I've been less successful doing that with Noble Ape, but there is certainly a large hobbyist user base that uses Noble Ape. So I think the simulations exist out there that do these kind of things. That isn't specifically the problem. The problem is really meshing the discoveries, insights, or perhaps observations of these simulations back into academia. And this is where people like Liz are ideally placed. I mean, it's going to be an interesting problem how you actually describe these things going into the future, and there is certainly a substantial time delta between where we are as simulators and what is being described philosophically. And I think here of Nick Bostrom et al. I mean, the understandings that the contemporary simulation community, this really goes outside artificial life in some regard, but the artificial life community is well placed in it, is just not being properly documented or accounted for in contemporary academia and philosophy in particular. And I think a lot of the wonder that the hobbyists and their users are seeing should in some regard translate to some part of this, broader I don't want to use the term revolution, but at least what emerges out of solving some aspect of the value problem to at least communicate this to a broader community. I mean, Liz, as I described this to you, if you imagine being an artificial life simulator like Larry Yeager, for example, who had a long history in physics, he worked at Apple, he worked on films, his background is voluminous fluid flow, compressible fluid theory, mathematical simulations, and then he comes to artificial life. And the artificial life simulations that came out, Polyworld in particular, it certainly was initially constrained by computational power and memory use, but now it's expanding into something which is more about modeling various cognitive behaviors, various abstract AI ideas of intelligence and metrics and these kind of things. How do you communicate this back to the philosophical community, the kind of folk that you're talking to that are skeptical that this thing called artificial life could have any impact on the philosophy of cognition?
Is that a question for me?
That's a question for you. How?
I think that the key is to basically bend a friendly ear. So I am sympathetic to Dick's position that it is hard to, get these, incur some sort of empathy for these insights in artificial life in the academic community. But as much as I've been told, well, that's not philosophy, or I don't understand the philosophical importance, for all of those people, there were just as many who were interested and who knew nothing about it but were fascinated to learn more. And for whatever reason, when this paper, my recent paper on artificial life, was sent to this biology and philosophy journal, they were actually very open to it. I mean, they right off the bat said, we could use a paper like this. This is the kind of paper that we need for this journal. And I think the reason is because there aren't too many philosophers writing about artificial life. And of course there's Mark Badeau, but for instance, if he has never sent one of his papers to this particular journal, this journal's response was, yeah, this is a paper we could use. Our readers need to know something about artificial life. So I got a really warm reception to the paper, and of course had to revise it and everything after that fact. But the initial reception was warm and was welcoming. So that's a good sign. And I think another key is basically speaking the philosopher's language. So, philosophers of science who do, for instance, philosophy of physics, and you really have to know the mathematics, and they really do know the mathematics, they're comfortable with talking about computer science and math and more technical issues. But philosophers who do something completely different, aesthetics or ethics, or they wouldn't necessarily know that there's anything in artificial life that they could understand or that they could be interested in. And I think it's basically speaking their language. I mean, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I'm sure that there are, artificial life programs that would give some insight into conceptual, non-scientific philosophy, conceptual philosophical questions, and it would take somebody to be able to put it into their language and say, this is the significance, this is why it's important, sort of like an ambassador for artificial life. And I think that there is interest out there. It's just a matter of, you're right, kind of pulling it all together, pulling all the forces together, because it is scattered.
From my own background, this is exactly where I came from developing Noble Ape. I was studying physics and philosophy in Australia, and I had a particularly unsympathetic philosophy department to the ideas of any component, particularly of their metaphysics coursework, that could actually be computer simulated, and from that came Noble Ape. Ironically, one of the chief instigators, who was a contemporary of mine at the time, is now at Oxford University working with Nick Bostrom directly. So it's one of these kind of great ironies that I've moved into relative obscurity and some aspect of, what have you here in the US, whereas he is not really instigating sufficiently with the likes of Bostrom. But I think the interesting point here is actually rephrasing these. The idea of the philosophical ambassador is very interesting, because really what you need in order to move into something like philosophy and a wide variety of other academic disciplines is sympathetic academics that actually, play Dr. Livingston fundamentally in terms of wandering into the wilds of things like artificial life and gathering the necessary information. What's interesting in a historical context, particularly when you talk about something like Evita, is you're talking about, what were the papers you surveyed? Were they kind of 8 or 9 years old now?
Yeah.
So you're taking a period of time which is, in artificial life perspective, relatively historical, and translating that to modern philosophy.
That's right.
Whereas really, I think what the core of the value problem, this was what was beautiful with regards to Margaret A. Bowden's work, was she went to what she saw as the kind of cutting points of the time of artificial life and produced a very contemporary and very vibrant message that was immediately passed on to people such as myself in Australia and folks all over the world, basically. So, and I think the challenge currently is finding people such as yourself who are willing to come into the wilds of this kind of discussion on things like Biota Live, and then communicate this message back to a philosophical audience. And it's interesting when you talk about, for example, philosophers of science, philosophers of physics, mathematics, these kind of areas, because a lot of the stuff that's explored in artificial life, whilst it has kind of vends into these aspects, is really exploring more fundamental kind of social evolution, information theory kind of phenomena, which is really more part of almost, I mean, aesthetics is a good example of that in fundamental sense. I mean, there's a lot of artificial life art that really is exploring a lot of aesthetic theory currently. So I think there's a number of possible ambassadors that could wander into the artificial life community and discover some things that they could take back to the philosophical community.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that there's clearly so much more in current artificial life that I'm unaware of, but I am absolutely confident that there are projects going on in artificial life that would have relevance to lots of different subdisciplines in philosophy. My point was really just that artificial life being as connected as it is to computer science and basically requiring, either soft implementation or hard implementation in robots, just that fact alone is enough to kind of turn off some philosophers if they think that's computers, that's not philosophy, that's not what I do, this is what I do. And I'm not saying that this is even a majority of philosophers. I think that's a prevailing attitude amongst some of the philosophical community, that it's an inherently different sort of project that has nothing to do with philosophy. I think, and that's unfortunate, but I think that's true. And a question that I have too is, of course, I'm thinking in terms of philosophy because that's my field, but I haven't done any sort of research to see, are there people in, psychology, economics, mainstream academic departments who are actively incorporating insights from artificial life into their own research? Do you know?
So certainly my mind flips to Dr. Paul Johnson, who I want to say that he's in New Mexico, but he could be in Arizona. He's been a previous Biota Live participant in the field of, using swarm research in political science in particular. In terms of economics, I was published last year in a book called Nature-Inspired Informatics, and that contained a number of economists that were using aspects of artificial life in modeling aspects of economics. And it was actually quite fascinating reading their particular papers, because it gave me a sense that people were actually starting to apply some of the small aspects of artificial life into these kind of questions. I think it's really a time problem in terms of getting what is going on currently out to all these possible folk. But with regards to actually how you present it to people that may not necessarily be interested, when I was naive and initially developing Noble Ape, I always thought that the visualization component would be a good way to describe things. So I sat down in front of philosophers and showed them the cognitive simulation of Noble Ape and tried to show them the basic principles, and you're exactly right. The immediate response was, that's computers, and a few of their favorite, most hated philosophers at the time, and said, well, that's obviously related to so-and-so's work. And I think that's an interesting problem with regards to artificial life simulation in particular, is that so much of it is visual, it's aesthetic, which is why it works as a hobbyist community and also a large kind of hobbyist user base in that regard. But translating that into something which philosophers in particular can pick up does require a particular group of academics that are willing to actually spend time, as you appear to have done with regards to the Avita folk at least, in terms of translating this in some regard to something that philosophers will be receptive to. The interesting idea is this idea of simulation science, and it's something that comes through Biota periodically, but I've always advocated, and I think this is the same with people who've appeared on previous Biota that talked about simulation science, that it is really, it has to have a philosophical aspect to it as well. And what's interesting with regards to the notion that we can actually get in, the broad definition of simulation science is that you have, on one end, theoretical science, and on one end you have applied science, and now you have people that are generating simulations to try and map theory onto application. But within this simulation, as artificial life practitioners know, you actually get a greater degree of insight than from either applied or theoretical aspect. And there is a broader philosophy within that is slowly percolating through. So I think there are a number of aspects here, but it's really how we translate this into something that the various communities, in your case specifically the philosophical community, is interested in. In terms of your surveying of artificial life, I've met various students that have gone to University of Colorado, predominantly the Boulder campus, that come from kind of ecology, simulated biology perspective. Do you get a sense of these two schools in terms of being potentially interested campuses for artificial life-related discussion?
You know, I don't know, and the reason is because I've only been at University of Colorado for this one past semester, and I'm teaching Introduction to Philosophy. So when and if, as I've mentioned to you in communication before, if, you know, a question comes up or an example comes up where artificial life as an explanation or as an example would be relevant, I'll use it, of course, in the classroom. But that has been my only exposure so far to the University of Colorado. And next semester when I'm teaching at Boulder, it may be a whole different a thing. I'm not sure. One thing that comes to mind is the Boulder campus does have an astrobiology program where it's kind of like an interdisciplinary program where undergrads can specialize in it and graduates can get a certificate in astrobiology. And they kind of bring together courses from the natural sciences and maybe the social sciences too. And then I think they have an astrobiology proper course that's part of it. And so it would be interesting to talk to them about, are they interested in artificial life research methods as ways of exploring, you know, origins of life, evolution of life, other possible ways of life, you know, kind of Christopher Langton type thinking. So that's a possibility, and one that I can think about when I'm there next semester.
Hey, Tom?
We have William R. Buckley on the call. William, as you listen in to the conversation, do you have any questions, any points you want to raise?
Well, the only thing that I'm curious about, and of course I've missed a lot of the call, but is wet artificial life. I've been paying a bit more attention to protocells recently, and it looks to me like there's an awful lot of activity in that particular area of the field. And so far I think what I've heard is primarily about computer science.
Well, I mean, with Mark Badeau, with his feet basically in both camps, I think it may be particularly as Protocell has wound down, I think you might see a few papers at least coming from Mark relating to this subject. But Liz, as you're on the call, what's your own thinking with regards to wet artificial life?
I know next to nothing about wet artificial life.
Okay.
It seems to me like it's not really winding down. Now, maybe Proto-Life, the project with Badeau and Norm Packard is.
That's what I'm saying.
But my reading of their book suggests that the Europeans are extremely interested in proceeding much further than what's really been done at Proto-Life. And I'm seeing that might really be the big area for development in the next 10 years, quite frankly.
Well, when we had Mark Badeau on, and I put that question to him explicitly, he was a bit more conservative with regards to his timeline. I think if you follow the stuff that's going on at Flint, What interests me is what we don't see, which may certainly come through in Europe in terms of the Protolife is a relatively open company. They produced a book, or at least a collection of works, and they have contributed a lot to the kind of public discourse associated with wet artificial life. What interests me is the wet artificial life practitioners that have contacted me who are part of either small startups that we haven't heard of or part of large pharma companies. And I think the reality is what we don't hear in wet artificial life, which may actually provide some very interesting and quite kind of spin on the turn our heads and look to see something that has just appeared from nowhere, but it actually has been worked on for a number of years, coming from these quarters as well. Obviously, the folk who do contact me with regards to these aspects don't like to appear on Biota Live necessarily, but some of them have at least promised that when they have public releases, they will come on. And my sense is you're exactly right. Whilst Mark Bordeaux and potentially the folk at Flint have relatively conservative timelines, it's probably what we don't hear about wet artificial life that's going to provide the points of interest in the next 5 and 10 years, where we will really have to leave our own thinking forward to what is actually released. So, is that your thinking as well, William?
It's along those lines, but also, the Proto-Life project itself, and I don't know that much about Flint, but it seems to me that there were a number of people who had similar projects they were working on. Luisi, I believe is his name, Pierluigi Luisi. His paper in the Protocells book is particularly intriguing in suggestions of the type of alternative approaches that might actually start to bear fruit. And I just have this sneaking feeling that Protocells is just one approach, and we will see a lot more other approaches. For a long time we've gone through various iterations, like the RNA world and work done down at UC San Diego and so forth, and it's beginning to build like a crescendo. That's what I'm seeing.
Okay. Tom, before we wind up, I'd like to get one more question in for Liz.
Certainly.
Okay. Let me just read one more sentence from her paper. Okay. In Langton loop experiments, we do not yet fully understand the intricacies of the relationships between genotype and phenotype in organic organisms, and it is believed that by observing and manipulating the mechanisms that synthesize this relationship artificially, we will gain insight into the analogous mechanisms in the natural case. Now, I'd like to suggest that Liz could add a 5th category of artificial life, which might come under the name of modeling, but that is that if we create a simulation that demonstrates the relationship between genotype and phenotype in a real organic organism, but now we have computer code which is doing that, it seems to me that itself is a form of artificial life, and in fact raises the question as to if the computer simulation does the same thing as the developing organism, then perhaps in some sense it is the same as the developing organism, and therefore the strong A-life hypothesis prevails.
Okay. Yeah, I follow you. I'm wondering what is the extra category that you would suggest I add?
Simulations that try to imitate real organic organisms.
Oh, okay.
In every detail that seems relevant. Of course, there's always some abstraction involved in modeling. But if a model does, I guess what I'm saying is if a model does and carries out the same processes as an organic organism, then in some sense it is the same and it is just as alive.
Yeah, I follow you. And so you are pushing the strong A-life line then? I don't think... well, look, let me put it in a very simple fashion if you want to think in terms of mental processes. And that is, it is clear to me that you are an automaton. I'm not, but you are. And this is because we think that physics works
and therefore ultimately will explain everything, and therefore the distinction between you as an automaton or a robot as an automaton is not important. That, in other words, if there is no Elan Vital, then what's the difference between a real thing and a simulation of the real thing?
Yeah. Yeah, I tell you. I think that's. I'm sorry, am I cutting you off? Did you have more to say?
Well, I mean, and if you insist on something being embodied, so you put the simulation in a robot, and then you really have blurred the lines.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, so theoretically, I do agree with you. If you have a model that can model every intricacy of its subject matter, then you would have to say the subject matter and the model are equivalent. I agree with you. I think that, to my knowledge, or at least to my understanding, that hasn't yet been done. So although Langton loops provide an interesting model of something that can copy itself and produce something new independent of itself, it is, of course, a highly specialized, highly simplified model because Langton loops are simpler than any known biological organism. So it's a highly specialized, highly idealized model. And that's how so much of science works. So it's not to discredit the model, in this case the Langton loops, and say that they're not useful. They are very useful and have the potential to provide a lot of insight. But we haven't yet made a model, to my knowledge, in artificial life that captures all of the intricacies of a biological organism. So
no, that's correct. But I'm saying that with the fast increasing speed of computers, the computer limitations themselves are being lifted considerably, and so we can proceed with the program of trying to simulate real organisms. But I'm saying that this gives a fifth category of artificial life, which is that simulation which it does what an organism does.
What you're talking about is the definition of equivalence. How do you define equivalence? And
I put it simply, if a robot can kill me the same way a wild animal can, I don't care whether it's alive or not.
Yeah, I'll agree with you there. It's the other way I like to describe it is, does it really matter what the substrate is? And most biologists now will agree that it doesn't matter what the substrate is.
Well, I think that's a good working hypothesis. I'm not completely convinced that it will come out that way, but I think what may result from such a program is an understanding that physics is not exactly what the current paradigm is, and there's a hint of this in Laughlin's work on alternatives to an alternative view of physics and whatnot. Unfortunately, he doesn't know much biology, so there's no significant discussion at all in his books that I've found so far on biology.
The only thing I would want to add about that is, I'm skeptical about that conclusion too. That in a living model that captured an artificial model that captured all the intricacies of the living system, you would have two equivalent systems. Because I don't buy that argument in the case of artificial intelligence, and so.
Would you consider the financial system to be artificially intelligent, Liz, as it exists today?
The financial system? No. I mean, I think of the people as, the intelligent nodes in that system, but I don't think of the system itself as independently intelligent.
So in terms of the fact that it's independently automated, though, do you think of that as a form of intelligence?
Of what? Sorry?
In terms of the fact that it's independently automated, do you think there is a kind of sub-intelligence there? Do you consider it intelligent?
I don't personally, no. I think of the people who are, even though it's a system, it's a human-created system, and we have lots of ways of grounding that in the human world with computers and paper trails and, numerical systems. So I don't see it personally, this is just my intuition, I don't see it as an independently intelligent system, no.
Because, I mean, certainly listening to the general discussion, my sense as an entity within the broader financial system is that I feel fundamentally simulated in that system. And what Dick is describing with regards to removing the living components, I can certainly see, as simulators have done, economists have done currently with regards to the 1890s financial system and the 1920s financial system and even the 1980s financial system. This can be simulated in such a way that the humans don't need to exist. So, I mean, I think when one starts making claims with regards to computational systems intelligence and what is existing in contemporary simulation, the simulations do exist in reality. It's just a matter of perhaps understanding the mathematics, the nature of the systems, and what they actually mean in a kind of human versus machine context. So certainly all that is described, and particularly with regards to, the potential of being killed by a machine or being killed by an animal. I mean, if you've ever had a primary financial institution either take or have your finances captured in some way, if you've ever had experiences of identity theft, all these kind of experiences lend you to believe fundamentally that you, in some level, no longer exist as yourself. And I think this is what we're describing. What interests me in this discussion, and particularly the biological perspective, is we think of this very much in terms of what we are capable of doing in contemporary simulation, looking at, single-celled organisms and the idea of intelligence. But these systems exist out there. It's just a matter of mapping the ideas of simulation onto these systems and then into the philosophy fundamentally.
Let me add a little point here. Consider the nature of human intelligence. I've got some feedback now. The point that I'm trying to make is, are humans as a whole intelligent, or are the cells that build up the brain the source of intelligence?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if the argument is that our financial systems are not intelligent, then perhaps it is not the human himself who's intelligent or herself, but it is the brain cells that are the ultimate source of intelligence. Where does it lie?
Yeah. Well, that's a good philosophical question. I mean, where is the intelligence? And philosophers talk about this question all the time. Is there some magic threshold where simple organisms are not intelligent, and then at some point complex organisms, and certainly humans are, and what is that magic threshold? But I think that, and Dick and I have discussed this over email, in fact, recently, I think that it's a mistake to reify conceptual systems as independently existing entities. This is a Cartesian-type error to say the financial system. I mean, a financial system is something that is it's a socially agreed upon system that we use a particular kind of symbols, and we manipulate them in a certain way.
How do you stop it? How do you stop it? If it's a system, it has to be able to be stopped in some way. And if it's a system that is in some way instantiated and controlled by humans, then it needs to be a way that humans can either restart it and stop it. And the contemporary financial system does not exist in this realm. Like the road system, these are systems which exist beyond the realm of individual or even large collectives of humans. So when you start describing these things as being human created, it's a way to be sympathetic to these systems, but it doesn't actually lend any way of understanding these systems and how we can use the knowledge that we've gained in kind of simulation sense, which ultimately economists are using as well, in a broader understanding of these systems. It seems to be a disconnect in the perception of the systems, which I think doesn't really connect with the broader community either.
The suggestion is that there are two thresholds, one above which intelligence appears and one below which intelligence is contained.
Mm-hmm.
That's the argument I'm hearing. That we start off with individual cells, and when you get a certain number of them, a certain organization of them, that's the threshold at which intelligence appears. But then if you have higher order systems above that, there's some kind of threshold at which the intelligence disappears.
Yeah, that's one way of putting it. And I'm not so much asserting an argument here really as just saying that I think it could be a category mistake to say because individual humans are intelligent the abstract systems they create are also intelligent. I'm not sure if I'm not convinced that follows, but I'm not making an argument to the contrary. I'm just saying I'm not sure if that follows.
Well, hopefully your continued participation in Biota Live might convince you otherwise, Liz. So
Okay.
I think this has been a beautiful conclusion to another year of Biota Live, and Liz, I want to thank you in particular for appearing this evening, and also I welcome you on future Biota Lives to have discussions associated with the wide variety of directions we've taken the conversation this evening. William, as you came to the conversation late, do you have any final question for Liz?
No, that's fine. I've asked the appropriate questions in chat, and as long as I can get a hold of some of these papers, I'd be thrilled to read them. And
Dick, it's always a pleasure having you on the call. Similarly, do you have any final questions for Liz?
Well, I think it's a little amusing hearing you two talk, because what you're complaining about is that we're out on the frontier, and it's very lonely out there. And what you would like to do is turn it into a very neat suburban neighborhood with mowed lawns. And I'm sorry, if you want to be on the frontier, it won't be there once it's mowed.
Are you talking to me or the group as a whole?
I'm talking to all of you. I mean, basically, we're a bunch of loners who happen to be able to get together through this wonderful medium, but we're out in the frontier. It's kind of lonely. There are a few others out here, and the whole business about the value and whatnot is a desire that it should all be nice mowed lawns.
Well, I think what I'm looking for here is a kind of metropolitan expansion. I'll continue to wander to the fringes, but I'd like to think that people such as Liz were going to start developing condos in the area that I'm currently.
I understand, but it's much more fun out in the frontier.
I have to agree with you, but I'd like to think that we weren't like completely in the middle of nowhere. I mean, now you've been to Victorville and Williams part of the world. You know exactly the notion of the kind of creeping Los Angeles as it kind of rolls over the hills. Well, I'm certainly out past Barstow currently, but I'd like to think that things were actually rolling along, and it does require some.
Oh, they are rolling along, and those who explore the wilderness leave behind them paths which eventually get paved.
Very much so.
I'd like it if those paths would pave themselves.
No, it takes people to pave them so far. Now, maybe artificial life will someday go into the wilderness by itself. And
developing systems, yes.
We ain't there yet.
Well, next year we're going to be moving to a different day at least. I know Liz has problems with regards to Saturday morning, but I'm certainly sympathetic recording Saturday afternoon or early Saturday evening for the early part of next year. So Biota Live as a format will be moving to Saturdays, but also it'll give us the opportunity to communicate with a wide variety of folk in Europe and Australia and Asia, and I'd like to send a shout-out to Ryan Flanagan in particular, who's in Japan currently listening in and participating in the chat, because really the artificial life community is an international community, and I'd like to think the Biota community, as a surveying of that, was also an international community. And Liz, I'd like to thank you in particular for bringing a new voice, new insight, and new ideas into the Biota Live discussion, and I look forward to talking to you next year.
Well, thank you very much, Tom. It was a pleasure, and I look forward to you visiting Biota Live again.
Wonderful. And William and Dick, I know I can't get rid of you two, so I'm back with you both.
You have to hang up on me, I guess.
Good night to both of you, and Happy New Year to all.
Same here. Bye-bye.
Happy New Year.
Thanks for doing this, Tom.
See you.
Bye-bye.